The deadliest aviation disaster in Bolivia in over 2 decades has just killed 22 people on a public road during Friday evening rush hour, and the cargo that spilled from the wreckage was 18 tons of freshly printed banknotes. A Bolivian Air Force C-130, Hercules, registration FAB-81, veered off the runway at El Alto International Airport at approximately 6:20 p.m. on February 27th, crossed the airport perimeter, and plowed into Avenida Juan Pablo II packed with traffic. 22 dead, and including children, at least 29 injured, 15 vehicles crushed or dragged along the road. Only 9 of the dead identified in the first 24 hours because of the condition of the remains. Ambulances attacked by crowds rushing the wreckage to grab scattered cash. Police firing tear gas past midnight. 49 arrested. President Rodrigo Paz called it a national tragedy. Defense Minister Marcelo Salinas announced an investigation. The black box has not been recovered. But here is the detail that tells the real story. Within hours of the crash that killed 22 people, Bolivian authorities began burning the banknotes. Soldiers and police officers stood around a fire on the same avenue where bodies had just been pulled from crushed vehicles and fed stacks of freshly printed bills into the flames. Central Bank President David Espinoza was present, supervising. His explanation was technical. The notes had not entered circulation and therefore carried no legal value. El Alto sits at 4,061 meters above sea level, the highest major city in the world, and one of the poorest urban centers in South America. The families who live along Avenida Juan Pablo II earn in a month what was burning in front of them in minutes. One resident, captured by Reuters, said what the entire crowd was thinking, that poor families needed that money, and the government set it on fire in front of them while the wreckage was still warm. The banknotes had no serial value. The grief did. And the image of soldiers feeding cash into a bonfire next to a mass casualty site became the single most shared moment from the disaster, not because it explained what happened, but because it showed who counted and who did not. To understand how El Alto arrived here, you have to watch the timeline accelerate. On Friday, February 27th, at approximately 6:15 p.m. local time, an intense hailstorm hit El Alto, a city already sitting at an altitude where weather can shift faster than ground crews can clear a runway. Within minutes, ice accumulated across the landing surface at El Alto International Airport, the highest commercial airport in the world, at 4,061 meters above sea level. At 6:20 p.m., FAB-81, a Bolivian Air Force C-130 Hercules, carrying approximately 18 tons of newly printed banknotes for the central bank, attempted to land. The aircraft touched down, failed to decelerate, veered off the runway, crossed the airport perimeter fence, and slid into Avenida Juan Pablo II during peak Friday evening traffic. It struck and dragged an estimated 15 vehicles along the road. One resident described the impact as so powerful the ground shook. He thought it was a massive truck dragging cars along the avenue until he looked out and saw the tail of a military aircraft sliding past his window. By 9:30 p.m., SNABAL, Bolivia's civil aviation authority, announced the runway was closed with a possible extension into Saturday. By 10 p.m., the crash site had been overrun. Banknotes from the ruptured cargo hold were scattered across hundreds of meters of road, and crowds were rushing the wreckage to collect them while rescue crews were still working. Police deployed tear gas. Clashes between crowds and security forces continued past midnight. By some accounts, tear gassing did not stop until 3 a.m. On Saturday, ambulances attempting to reach the injured were surrounded and aggressed by the same crowds fighting over the money. 49 people were arrested for vandalism and looting. By Saturday morning, the confirmed death toll stood at 22. The black box had not been found. Here is the problem that is not making headlines. El Alto International Airport sits at 4,061 meters above sea level, the highest international airport in the world. At that altitude, the physics of landing an aircraft change in ways that most people never think about. Air density is roughly 60% of what it is at sea level. Engines produce less reverse thrust on rollout. Wings generate less aerodynamic drag at the same ground speed, and braking systems, the last line between a controlled stop and a runway excursion, lose a significant portion of the atmospheric resistance that helps heavy aircraft decelerate after touchdown. AC-130. Hercules landing at El Alto needs a far longer stopping distance than it would at any airport near the coast. Every variable that helps a loaded military transport slow down is degraded by the altitude before the wheels even touch. Now add hail. At 6:15 p.m. on February 27th, an intense hailstorm deposited ice across the runway surface. Hail at 4,000 meters does not behave the way it does at a coastal airport. The ambient temperature is lower, the ice persists longer, and the friction coefficient on a contaminated surface drops to a fraction of what the aircraft's braking system was designed to overcome. A fully loaded C-130 carrying 18 tons of cargo, close to the maximum payload for the airframe, touching down on a hail-covered runway at the highest airport on the planet is not a routine operation. It is an engineering scenario with almost no margin for error, and the margin that did exist was consumed the moment the wheels failed to grip. The Bolivian Air Force's Investigative Commission has formally requested the exact crash time and complete meteorological data from NABOL. Wind direction, wind speed, visibility, and runway surface condition at the moment of touchdown. That request tells you what the investigators already suspect, but have not said publicly. The deeper question is one no official has answered: whether FAB 81 should have attempted the approach at all, whether the crew received adequate weather data before committing to land, whether the runway had been inspected or treated after the hailstorm, whether a go-around was considered, attempted, or never discussed. The black box, which would contain the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data, has still not been recovered from the wreckage. And then it got worse. 22 people died on Avenida Juan Pablo II on Friday evening, not inside the aircraft, on the road beneath it. And they were in their cars, on minibuses, walking the shoulder, doing what every resident of El Alto does at 6:20 on a Friday, which is trying to get home. The plane did not fall from the sky. It came through the airport fence at ground level, sliding at speed, and the people in its path had no warning, no siren, and no time to move. 15 vehicles were struck, some were crushed flat, some were pushed and dragged for dozens of meters along the avenue. The force was enough to make the ground shake blocks away. Only 9 of the 22 dead were identified in the first 24 hours. Police Commander Mirko Sokol confirmed the difficulty. The condition of the remains exceeded what local forensic teams could process in a single night. Families gathered at hospitals across El Alto and La Paz, waiting for word that in some cases would not come for days. Children were among the dead. Authorities have not released exact ages. And while those families waited, into the avenue outside was descending into something no emergency protocol had been designed to handle. Vice Interior Minister Hernan Paredes described the crowd that formed around the wreckage in terms that make the scale tangible. Hundreds of people pushing past barriers, grabbing at banknotes, overwhelming a security perimeter that was set up for a crash site, not a riot. Rescue crews trying to reach the injured found themselves surrounded by people who were not there to help. And paramedics were blocked. Ambulances were aggressed. First responders had to make a choice: no training manual covers, treat the wounded or protect themselves from the crowd. By Saturday, authorities had consolidated the toll and the burning had begun. Soldiers stood in a ring around the fire. David Espinoza supervised. The official line, the bills had never entered circulation, carried no legal value, and had to be destroyed to prevent counterfeiting and illicit use. In the line from behind the police cordon, from the residents who had watched their neighbors pulled from vehicles hours earlier, was shorter. 22 people just died on this road. Their families cannot afford the funerals, and you are burning money in front of them. The central bank later announced it would invalidate certain Serie B denomination notes, 10, 20, and 50 Boliviano bills, and allow exchanges through the banking system for anyone holding legitimately obtained notes. The details of that exchange process have not been released. The runway at El Alto International Airport has reopened. Flights have resumed. Defense Minister Marcelo Salinas has confirmed a commission is investigating. The black box has not been found. The meteorological data requested by investigators has not been made public. The exact sequence of decisions that put a fully loaded military C-130 on a hail-contaminated runway at the highest airport in the world during a storm at rush hour on over a public avenue, that sequence has not been explained. The official framing is investigation pending. How do you tell the families of 22 people, including children, that the aircraft which killed them was not carrying passengers or medicine or emergency supplies, but 18 tons of freshly printed banknotes for the central bank, and that the cargo which survived the crash was set on fire in the street before all of the dead had even been identified? How do you explain to a city of 1 million people living at 4,000 meters in one of the poorest urban centers in South America that the reason crowds rushed a mass casualty site was not criminality but desperation? That the same poverty which puts families on Avenida Juan Pablo II at 6:20 on a Friday evening is the poverty that made a field of scattered banknotes impossible to walk away from, even next to the wreckage? And if a military transport loaded to maximum payload attempted a landing on a contaminated runway at the highest international airport on Earth during an active hailstorm, with a public road sitting directly beyond the overrun zone, and 22 people on that road are now dead, who approved the approach? On Avenida Juan Pablo II, the banknotes are gone. The wreckage has been cleared. The fire where soldiers burned the money that carried no legal value has gone cold. But the avenue is still there. Traffic moves across it every evening at 6:20, the way it always has. And the runway it sits beneath has not moved a single meter.